question is what is God doing?
When we think about the world today, it's a crazy place.
Your spiritual life, your own life, your family life. Welcome to today's Daily 320. We are honoring God, building healthy relationships, and we are having a blast. It is so fun taping these with my wife and the things that go on behind the cameras and all the fun that we're getting to have as we grow in different ways. This week we're talking about the principle, because we're sheltering at home, we're talking about the principle of giving honor where honor is due. Because I remember growing up in my family, what was it like at home, and what are the things that my parents taught me that have shaped me today? And as you're sheltering at home, what are the things that you can instill in one another? What can I instill in you? What can we learn together that helps us move forward and see a great life as we walk? The Daily 320 is all about walking towards the great things of God. Seeing God do far more than we could ever imagine, guess, or request in our wildest dreams. And so what do we need to honor? One of the things my parents taught my sister and I was the value of generosity. Now, generosity is not about what we give, but who we are. And so many times we look at generosity as a emotion, an activity, something we do, that we drive by the bridge and there's a guy and, oh, I gave the $5, or I did this, or I did that. And generosity isn't what we do, but it's who we are all the time. And so the question is, it isn't what have I given, it is who are you? And are you a generous person in all you do? Here's some ways that my parents taught me generosity. Number one, they taught me generosity in abundance. I've said that before, that we were very blessed, which I hate even using that word when it comes to abundance, but there were times we had a lot of money. And we were generous in abundance, and we would give to others in those times, and we would use that money to try to help others. At the same time, one of the things I learned from my parents is we were generous in poverty, because we lived in the oil days, and when oil would drop, just like today, and the barrels would be worth a lot less, we would make a lot less. And so I remember the times where we went through the process of losing our house and losing cars and not knowing what we were going to do for income and being down to the last dollars and what were we going to do. But it never affected the generous spirit that my parents had. That they had always figured out a way to give even in a place of poverty, socioeconomic poverty. They were never poor in their mind, and they were never poor in their spirit. They were abundant. But they always had a way to give no matter what. And generosity would always outweigh the circumstances in which we live. And so generosity was there in abundance. Generosity was there in poverty. Generosity was there in hospitality. And everything that the Lord gave us, from the houses we grew up in, to the cars that we had, to everything else, it was given to us to give to others. So we would host parties at our house. We would give, back in the early 80s, the cool thing to do for families, if you had a little bit of money, was to have a custom van. And it's kind of funny, Robin and I talk about that and laugh, because we all had custom vans growing up that just sat in our driveways that we would take out every once in a while. And we would use that van as a way to be generous to others. Somebody needed to take a trip to Florida, here's our van. Somebody needed to take a trip to Turner Falls, here's our van. And so we would use the things we had to give in that way. And it was hospitable to do things. We would use our house. And it didn't matter what house we lived in. We lived in some really big, cool houses, and we lived in some really small houses. But at the same time, we'd be generous with hospitality no matter what, and how we treated people as they came into those houses. Why do we serve them? How do we serve it? Are we doing it with a smile on our face? Are we going to run out? Are we going to do it with an abundant mindset or a poverty mindset? How do we give, and how are we generous in hospitality to be the light of the world? So we're generous in poverty. We're generous in abundance. We're generous in hospitality. We're generous in opportunity. My parents would hear about different people's opportunity. I remember a little bit, not much, but of a family that we were close with that they were in poverty and they didn't have a whole lot. But they were trying to raise the money to adopt a child. And it was at a time where the oil boom was kind of coming down on the other side, like what we're seeing right now on our economy. And even though it wasn't a great time for my parents to give, they still gave the money, and I won't say the amount, but a very large amount of money to help this other family be able to adopt this child. You know what this family did? They took the money, and then they didn't adopt the child. And so we could have gotten bitter, and we could have gotten upset, but we were giving, and we were generous towards opportunity. One of the things that God wants us to do is to be generous towards opportunity, and it's not our place to weigh what other people do when we give that money away, but it's our place to sow that money and knowing that we're giving to God, not to that person or that particular opportunity. And in that, and being generous to opportunity, sometimes you're going to see God do great things, and sometimes you're going to get jilted. And it's just the way life is. And when you get jilted, you can't get upset and you can't take it in, but you have to learn one of the other ways to be generous. You need to be generous in grace. And my parents taught me, and I learned that we always need to be generous in grace, that when people hurt our feelings, when we hurt people's feelings, we always need to give grace to one another. It's one of the reasons that one of my greatest pet peeves is when people just go dark. I'm going to go dark. He upset me. I'm not going to talk to him. I'm going to show him. God doesn't want me. There's nothing scriptural about that. I'll say it very clearly. That when you go dark, you are falling into the hands of Satan himself, because Satan is dark. And so when you cut people off, you're not being generous in grace. And last time I checked, the one thing that Christ was most generous in was his grace. He was generous to the lady that was an adulterer. He was generous to people that needed healing. He was generous to lost people, to tax collectors. He was generous to everybody with his grace if they would accept the grace. Now, understand, Jesus was not going to hang out with people that went dark. Jesus was not going to hang out with people that would hold a grudge. Jesus was not going to be intimate with people that would carry that on. He would keep on walking instead of staying with somebody that allowed that thing to grow inside of him, because he had a generous spirit. And so today, as we talk about honoring others, I want to honor my parents for teaching me a spirit of generosity. And I hope my kids have gotten it, and I hope my wife and I grow in that. And wherever we live, whatever God gives us, if we live in a single wide or if we live in a bigger house or what, we don't care. Let's be generous with it. And let's have a generous spirit that we're always giving to be the light of the world. And so my question to you today, as we're going through the coronavirus and we're sheltering at home and we're not out around as many people, that we can't go to church, that we can't go to work for some of us, all those things, how are we being generous to those that are closest to us? How are we being generous in grace? How are we being generous in hospitality? How are we being generous in opportunity and sowing into other people's future? How are we being generous in abundance? That God's given us plenty, so let's just keep on giving. How are we being generous in poverty, where it doesn't feel like we have something to give, but we find something, even if it's good words, kind words, Colossians, where we give something and we live with a spirit of generosity. Well, I want to thank you for joining us for the Daily 320. We're so excited about what God is doing in your life. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. We encourage you to share this message with others. We love the texts, the emails, the messages we're getting back from what God's doing in this process. Man, hit send to somebody else, and let's create a generous spirit in our nation as we go through this season of crisis. God bless you. God can do anything, and I'll see you tomorrow.